I call it the crisis of love. The tagline of the book is India's Lonely Young Women. Economists have been talking about something we call an emotional tax. The idea is that when people start to deviate from very traditional norms, societies and families and loved ones will tax people not in rupees or in dollars, but in feelings. So your self-worth will be questioned. You will be made to feel unloved. For example, one of the women I followed through this 15-year journey ends up becoming a female accountant, one of the first women in her family to finish school, college, work outside the home. She comes from Delhi. She joins the Delhi Account Service. And essentially what she tells me constantly is that no one in her family will ever be interested in her professional achievements because they only want to talk to her about the marriage market. She's constantly made to feel essentially an underachiever because she's not married yet while she's doing very successful things at her work. And it's very common for her, for example, she would tell me she'd buy someone a gift. She bought a cousin a motorbike. And essentially the family pretended the motorbike came from a male cousin because they didn't want to acknowledge that she was the one who had actually earned and bought this motorbike for the family. And there is this crisis of feeling unloved and unrecognized when you're out there in the workforce. There are other manifestations of this as well. I keep hearing from particularly women who are somewhat elite, more westernized. Women, for example, there's an IIT IIM product I followed for 15 years. She essentially tells me that the better she does in her career, the more lonely and terrible the mating and dating market becomes. And I think the upshot essentially is, and men, particularly South Asian men, she finds, are unable to handle the professional successes of women. And there's actually a study that's just come out recently saying as women seem to do better and better in professional jobs, they're made to feel more lonely, less supported. The final manifestation of this crisis of love is actually much more concrete. It's the labor of love. So you see this image, it's Shah Rukh in a film called Rab Ne Bana Di Jodi, which I highly recommend everyone should go watch. I followed in the book a migrant domestic worker from Jharkhand. She moved to a neighborhood in Delhi to work for an expat family. And what she says to me is this is her favorite film. This is a woman, remember, who's paid for doing care labor. And she says, looking at this film, that if men performed as much domestic, as many domestic chores as Shah Rukh does in this movie, women's lives would be much better. She also says there's a song in this film where he's essentially serenading a tiffin that his wife has made for him. I can see some young women in the audience shaking their heads because they know the movie and they know it well. And she says, if only we would have men who would appreciate and participate in care labor. It's important to recognize India continues to be in the bottom 5 of the world when it comes to men doing housework. And in that world, this crisis of love is not just an emotional tax, but it's also a very concrete set of constraints on care labor and how you share your time. What the book also tries at least to do, and I think this is where research, at least the research helps, is typically when we talk about what's happening to women in the economy, and I apologize if I'm about to offend people here, but we tend to talk about heroes, so there's CEOs, which is fantastic, and then we talk about victims. The typical gender narrative, if you look at the media, if you look at what's being written, tends to focus on high achievers, which is wonderful, or cases which really require public attention. But there's a missing middle. And the missing middle is all these women who are trying to hold on to just a regular job, trying to assert their livelihoods and their independence. And I call it the missing middle of the gender narrative. And in the book, through the 15 years of this work, what I actually did realize is I call them intimate revolutions, which is the kinds of social changes and upheavals that occur within people's intimate spaces, in their relationships with their boyfriends, husbands, fathers, mothers, as women start to step out of the home and work. I think we heard a little bit of this today right now when members from SEWA were speaking, which is you feel much more confident, you have a sense of self-esteem. Where it becomes very transparent in essentially our research and the work that I've done is at the beginning of 15 years, women were not able to watch Shah Rukh films, and at the end of these 15 years, all of them are. And another very important change in norms is between mothers and daughters. Mothers would like to marry a man like Shah Rukh. The daughters, because they've seen their mothers struggle in the economy and try to hold on to a job, they want to be Shah Rukh. Thank you. Finally, this is actually a woman who's bought her own tickets with her own money. Women articulate jobs as joy. You know, often we think of jobs and we think of GDP, we think of all of these very technical things, which is fantastic. But if you ask a regular person, why do you have this job? Often it is to be able to spend it on things that give you happiness and pleasure. And I realized through Mr. Shah Rukh Khan and essentially the conversations around his icon, that might be a more interesting and innovative way to actually ask people about how they're experiencing the economy. I'll close with this. We tend to think that the economy is a lot of people at Davos discussing very important things. Of course it is, but the economy is all of us here as well. The economy is actually a set of social relationships. The economy has a rich emotional and ethical life. The economy contains all these stories of the women, from the accountants to the women standing outside Mannat, to the women buying tickets for themselves. It carries their joys and their sorrows and their triumphs and their tragedies. And what I leave you with, and I encourage all of you, because many of you are in very powerful positions to be able to impact the workforce and policies, is each time we look at a graph like this, and this is the recent labor force participation rate graph, let's not just think of it as a statistic. Let's think of the emotional life that these graphs and these numbers try to convey, the stories that these statistics seem to hide. And for more, read the book. Thank you.
A huge round of applause for Sharanya Bhattacharya. Sharanya, many thanks for taking us through SRK's lessons on women employment. It was an absolute pleasure listening to you. Thank you. All right, let me now invite on stage Niyati, who is a CA and digital content creator. She's not just been empowering women with her strong educational content, but is also bringing a positive change in the society with her action-driven content. Please welcome Niyati. Sorry, I was looking.
Hello everyone. We've had a very insightful evening with a lot of amazing discussions with a lot of panelists. So now to just kind of break the ice before the main event that we're all here for, I just wanted to ask the audience if they have any suggestions for any woman who's just entering the workforce. Because I remember, and incidentally, I started my career at the workplace with Deloitte, who was the knowledge partner for the event. I was an intern over there, and I remember going there on my and I remember going there as a green 21-year-old, not knowing what to do, seeing everybody run around. So that's why I want to ask you if you all have any advice for the women watching, for the newbies, on what they should do.
So I entered Deloitte 30 years ago, and my advice to the new me, in case I was entering Deloitte all over again, is to be super confident, believe in oneself, and forge ahead. Today, of course, the world is a much better place. In those days, I have to tell you a quick story. In those days, clients would come in. I used to work in financial advisory. Clients would come in. I'd welcome them, offer them tea, coffee, we'd make some small conversation, and then I'd say, okay, what is it about? And they would tell me, isn't there anybody more senior joining us? So I'll leave the story there, but I think today we are in a better position, but consolidate that and forge ahead.
Is there anyone else who'd like to share their stories, some advice?
I'm a mother of an 8-year-old girl, and I want a lot of women who are here to be an inspiring model for girls who will be entering their career 10 years down the line, right? When we entered, obviously, there were less choices. I run a startup, an MSME, where we have at least 50% women participation. We tend to create jobs for a lot of women entrepreneurs as part of our main motive. But what I see in a lot of my colleagues is that the only thing now they're lacking is motivation, right? Motivation to continue to do what they have achieved so far.
मैं हमारी सेवा की बहनों से पूछना चाहूँगी, अगर उन्हें किसी महिला को जिन्हें कुछ नया शुरू करना है उसके लिए कोई सलाह है, आपके पास कोई सलाह है कि अगर किसी को कुछ नया शुरू करना है तो उन्हें क्या करना चाहिए? थोड़ी सी मदद।
मैं तो ये चाहूँगी कि अगर वो कुछ नया करना चाहती है ना, तो सबसे ज़्यादा वो आसपास, अपने आसपास देखती है कि उसके अंदर विश्वास होता है पर उसे तोड़ने वाले बहुत होते हैं। सबसे पहले उसे आत्मविश्वास की ज़रूरत है, और फिर वो एक साथ पैर पे पैर रखती जाएगी ना, तो उसे साथ देने वाली हम बहनें ही हैं। क्योंकि मैं तो यही चाहती हूँ कि मुझे तो बहनों ने यहाँ तक, मैं जो मेरे लिए बहुत स्वप्न की तरह है, एक स्वप्न की तरह है, तो मैं इसे सोच सोच के शायद रात को भर सो नहीं पाऊंगी कि मैंने कहाँ गई थी, मैं कहाँ गई थी। अब ये सोच के कर रही हूँ कि अब और ज़्यादा करके मैं अपनी बहनों को जोड़ूंगी, जो मैंने देखा है वो भी देखने की कोशिश करे।
Thank you so much for all of those heartening stories. And I love the point that Sharanya mentioned earlier about the missing middle. And I think when it comes to talking about gender parity, it's important to celebrate these victories as well from stories, these small anecdotes, these small stories. When someone says that things are much better now than they were 30 years ago, or when someone shares their experience of breaking a glass ceiling or doing something that people in an earlier generation couldn't do. These are the stories that we ought to celebrate. Okay, we can't hold on to it and be restricted by it, but these are the stories that we ought to celebrate. Now, Shereen quoted a very interesting statistic that it will take 132 years for women, for gender parity at the workplace. So, Shereen, I just wanted a tidbit from you. We only see media houses from the front of the camera as viewers. So could you give us an insight about gender parity in media houses?
Well, I don't want to speak about media in general. I can speak for CNBC-TV18. As I said, we have achieved gender parity. In fact, I think today we're more women than we are men. And it's not because we've consciously decided to hire more women. We've consciously decided to create a workplace that is an equal opportunity workplace. And as the Naval Chief said, it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. What matters is, are you right for the job? And that is what has helped us make the decisions when it comes to hiring, when it comes to elevation. I think what we have consciously designed our policies to ensure, this is the issue that the ambassadors were also talking about, that we plug the leaky pipe, that we don't have attrition, especially as far as the middle management pipe is concerned. And as I pointed out, we haven't lost a single woman to maternity. They've all returned back to the workforce. And I truly believe that, you need to ensure that women feel as valued as their male colleagues, that women feel seen and heard and appreciated and recognized. And that's the culture, that's the environment that we've created, where everyone, irrespective of their gender, feels valued, feels appreciated, feels recognized. And so I would say that today at CNBC-TV18, we're very proud of the fact that we are we have achieved gender parity, and we are gender neutral as well.
I think it's so important for oh, you want to share something?
Sure.
I want to say something based on my experience of 20 years in media. Mr. Uday Shankar is sitting right there, one of my bosses in the early years. Mental toughness is something women lack, especially in the age of 20, 21, from their teenage. And this is something I always read almost once in a week, and everybody, I suggest that everybody goes through this over and over again. There is something called a Stockdale paradox. Let me take 2 minutes of your time. The Stockdale paradox is a concept that was popularized by Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great. It was named after James Stockdale, former vice presidential candidate, naval officer, and Vietnam prisoner of war. Stockdale was held captive as a prisoner of war for over 7 years. He was one of the highest ranking naval officers at that time. During this horrific period, Stockdale was repeatedly tortured and had no reason to believe he'd make out of it alive. Held in the clutches of the grim reality of his hell world, he found a way to stay alive by embracing both the harshness of his situation with a balance of healthy optimism. When Stockdale came back from Vietnam and was interviewed on how he managed to stay alive in these years, this is what the conversation said. Now listen very carefully. Who didn't make it out? he said, oh, that's easy. The optimists, they were the ones who said, we are going to be out by Christmas. And Christmas would come and Christmas would go. Then they'd say, we are going to be out by Easter. And Easter would come and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, and then it would come again, and Christmas would come and go again. And they died of a broken heart. They all died of a broken heart. So Stockdale explained this idea as the following. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. Hence, all the women and men always remember, in the end, we will prevail. And just keep swimming, keep gliding, keep going through those years while maintaining a healthy balance of work-life balance and a me time versus work time balance, with the thing in mind that maybe 10 years, if not 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, I will prevail. So that is, I guess mental toughness is something I've learned from Mr. Uday Shankar. I worked with him in Star News, and that will what make you survive, mental toughness.
I think to conclude, we can all say, apna time aayega. And on that note, I'll cut it to Shruti for the next segment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Niyati, for such an engaging conversation. Moving on, it's now time to watch Ajaita Shah share the incredible story of frontier markets and how it is empowering women entrepreneurs and sellers through various initiatives. Take a look.
Rural customers, given that where they live, they don't have access to doorstep delivery. They don't have access to technology, and they don't necessarily have access to even dukans. Like, stores are not available where they live. So the first element of what Frontier Markets wanted to do was build a supply chain. Can we actually build warehouses and have delivery people that would be able to take physical products and deliver to the doorstep for where rural customers live? So to solve that problem, we actually then invested in a network of rural women entrepreneurs who we call our Saroj Jeevan Sahelis. Today, on average, our women that start working with us, let's say from day one, are already earning at least 1,000 to 1,500 rupees in that first month. Some of our Sahelis who are older Sahelis are earning up to 10,000 rupees a month. At the average level of income that women are earning in any of these initiatives, it's actually 4 to 5 times higher.
Right, moving on. CNBC-TV18 partnered with FICCI to study the state of women's representation across the formal private sector in India. To release the report and discuss the findings and the way forward, I would now like to invite on stage Subhrakant Panda, President FICCI. Ladies and gentlemen, applause for the next panelists. Uday Shankar, former President FICCI, Naina Kidwai, former President FICCI, and Shereen Bhan to take the conversation forward.
Thank you very much, Shruti. Thank you, Naina. Thank you, Subhrakant. And thank you, Uday, for joining us here. Shrayana is one of my heroes, and I'm so glad that we could get her here to talk to you about how we should really look at some of these issues, and she gives it a very different spin. And as she said, don't look at these numbers as mere statistics. There are stories behind them, and I love you too, Shrayana. And that's the effort that we're hoping to put together here, because at the end of the day, you also need a repository of credible data that can be used to direct intervention where intervention is required. This is the first, ladies and gentlemen, the first CNBC-TV18 FICCI Gender Parity Survey. So thank you very much to the team at FICCI for joining hands with us. You'll see the graphics coming up on your screens, and the story is an incomplete one at this point in time. There's a lot of distance that needs to be covered, and let me just give you some of the highlights of the survey. As I pointed out, it covered over 80 companies across the manufacturing and the services sector, companies with a turnover of 20 crores plus. And here's what we know from the survey. 69% of the gender composition in the workforce is male, 31% is female. So we do have a long distance to cover. Here's what we need to focus on, and that is attrition. Attrition in the workforce. Between the age group of 20 and 30, we see 15% of women dropping out. Between the age group of 30 to 40, 13% of the female workforce drops out, and that is something that we need to focus on. That is something that we need to intervene in. So Naina, let me start by asking you, and we're going to keep showing up some of these graphics on the screen. But in terms of intervention, especially on the back of the efforts that you championed yourself with the organizations that you worked with and currently with the boards that you're on, what do you believe should be prioritized to ensure that we fix the retention problem?
So the statistics clearly tell you there's a leaky pipeline in that age group of 20 to 30, which by the way also exists for men. So women leave for reasons we expect, childbearing and marriage less so. Men leave because they aren't particularly stable in the ages of 20 to 30 in terms of where they want to stick. So the statistics may not be too different, but the reasons are different. You heard a couple of suggestions about elder care and childcare being two ways to support women coming back in the workplace. I think the whole area of outreach, when they leave for maternity leave, to bring them back in, and the way you board them back in becomes important. Because if you come back to a cohort which you belonged in, but you're junior to that cohort, and then you're being treated like the stepchild because, oh my God, she's got a kid at home, and oh my God, I don't want her on my team, then there's no reason why you would come back to that organization. So the way organizations engage with all that training and cost that went into creating that talent in the first place, and then onboarding them back is quite important. And I would lastly just say, you'll see that in the statistics, companies are beginning to tick the boxes in terms of hygiene, doing the right thing, sexual harassment policies. But are companies culturally true to what is required to create an ecosystem which makes it worthwhile for women to say, hey, I do want to come back to the job I left because I loved it enough, and the organization loved me enough to help me along the way.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's exactly what we're trying to do as well, culturally, to ensure that a woman wants to come back to the work that she left before making a life choice. Uday, I want to understand from you as well, you know, talking about the cultural shift, the mindset shift, the behavioral shifts that organizations need to focus on to ensure that we do move towards gender parity, that we do fix the attrition problem. Take me through some of the examples of the organizations that you worked with, and as you look back today and reflect on what worked and what didn't. Sometimes policies that are put in place to actually help hurt much more than they help, you know, and they have the counter impact. So what's been the big lesson and the learning for you in all of these years?
So, you know, as Naina said, that it's the critical importance is of the enabling environment that you create. And when we think of creating the enabling environment, we think of really often very big things, and those are all important. But it's the small things that matter equally strongly. So I'll just give you an example. Almost 24, 23 years ago, when I set up a news channel here in Delhi and we were running it, this was the first time a 24/7 live news channel came into existence. Yeah. It was a beast that the country hadn't experienced, and even in terms of managing it, it was something that we were not prepared for. And Delhi being Delhi, one of the big problems was we had a huge workforce of women in the team. Even then, there were anchors, reporters, sub-editors, video editors, all kinds of people. And the one big problem was that how do you make sure that they get home safely? And this, you know, I mean, unlike a newspaper where people started at a fixed time and the edition went to bed and they went home. Here, this was going on. And in months of winter or in summer, just getting them home was a huge problem. Even the administration team was not prepared for it. Yeah. So one of my big struggles was to fight with the people in the administration to make sure that there were cars available for women to be taken home. And then we realized that it wasn't safe to just let one girl or one woman go in a car because there were some incidents. So we had to just then make sure that How do you handle the logistics of all of this?
Yeah.
And this was, it was a non-trivial, it should have been a trivial problem, but it turned out to be a non-trivial solution. And we were able to do that. And I think today there are a large number of women who are able to work comfortably in news because we were able to solve that. When I moved to Mumbai to run another news channel, women going back home was just not an issue. And I was pleasantly surprised when I went there. There was no dropping home policy because women came out, they happily took a cab and went home. But rains were a huge issue. So in the month of monsoon, you had to solve for a very different kind of problem. So I think the problems are different. And when we talk about enabling environment, you have to work towards participation. We all, I think a great point was made by your colleague that we look at heroes and victims, but there's this huge mass of people in between. How do you make sure they come in and they stay engaged, as you said, that they don't drop off? That's important.
No, and I think, you need to arrive at solutions that are contextual and relevant because as you said, Bombay's problems are very different from Delhi's problems and you need to design your policies to cater to that. But Subhrakant, let's talk about the survey, and public transportation or the lack of is one of the aspects that, that often force women to move out, and even some men, I have to say, to consider different options. And this is one thing that the survey also highlights where more needs to be done. Care, creches on premises, again something that the survey highlights not enough has been done on that, and perhaps that's an area where intervention could make a difference. On the back of the response that's come in on this first FICCI CNBC-TV18 survey, what would you prioritize as urgent action?
Well, Shereen, first of all, I'd like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to be part of this exercise. I think it's something that we are very proud to be part of and look to take it forward. Your specific question about what can be done, I think there are many things that can be done, and I think first and foremost is to create that cohort to begin with, because when you look at getting women into the workforce, right? If there are, there will always be pioneers, and we see some of them right here, but I think it's important to then take that journey forward and create that cohort so that it's, there are people around them who understand and who create a support system. And then, of course, there are, I think, other things to be done in terms of sensitization of the workforce and sensitization of colleagues as to what is acceptable, what is not, because even if something is said harmlessly, it can create a lot of damage and create chaos, right? And the second thing, and the other thing I think is infrastructure. In terms of the simple aspects, like like Uday just said, that we can have a big vision, but it's often the little minor details like not having toilets or toilets which are for women which are not on the same floor, for example. These are the little things which like they say, which come in the way of making women feel safe, accepted, and welcome in the workforce. So I think it's a little bit of all of these things that one needs to target while keeping an eye open on the big vision. What is it that we're trying to achieve? And that's where I think what the Admiral said, that the longer term vision is important, but the nitty-gritty is the nuts and bolts of making that work to make women feel safe, secure, and welcome in the workforce is, I think, what is important.
No, absolutely. Naina, speaking about the journey that we need to cover, and one of the other aspects that the survey shows up, the board of directors, women in leadership positions is what we're speaking of, 22% board of directors, and C-suite executives 21%. Now, everyone's been talking about whether we need legislation to make change happen, we need, mandatory quotas, etc. And a lot of the needle has turned as far as the listed entities are concerned after the SEBI mandate came in, that you need to have women directors on board, you need to have independent women directors on board. The cohort that we've surveyed are not just representative of the larger companies, many of the smaller universe has also been surveyed here. In your assessment, do you believe that it is imperative for legislation, for mandatory quotas to bring about change?
And Shereen, you and I have talked about this before, and I think we were both on the same page, and ideally we didn't want quotas. We wanted women to make it through on merit. And I was of that school, because I think quotas then make it difficult for women who've made it there, because everyone sort of points a finger and says, well, you got there because there was a quota, not because you're capable. So that's the sort of negative of it. But I'm a firm believer in quotas after seeing what happened on the women in boards situation. Because we worked very hard for it and we were at sort of 5%. And with the most ridiculous excuses being made by my male colleagues, oh, she hasn't been on a board before, but you know, every guy has never been on a board before. So what's different here? So she's not been a CEO. Well, not every board member has been a CEO. So different lens being applied to women coming on board, it was frustrating. And then the dictate, when it happened, again, there was resistance, there were excuses, but they had to get there. And one is not good enough. I mean, heck, the guideline for two, the guideline that they even for family-owned companies, it should be an independent director, are yet to be achieved. But the companies that have actually made it, I was just hearing from my old friend at Nestle that their board is at 50%. Some of the best boards I've served on are at a minimum of 33%. So we have a ways to go, but the regulation was really very critical there, and I saw that you did push the minister on that as well. Well done.
And she,
well
she didn't take the bait. She didn't take the bait at all.
She's very smart.
She is. But Uday, you know, a lot of this also has to do with constant communication. And as I said, you cannot deal with this as an issue on Women's Day. Everybody wants to talk about women on Women's Day and forget about it for the rest of the year. This has to be something that you reinforce the messaging throughout the year. I also, you know, and since you're now involved with the cricket world, a big move, gender parity as far as salaries are concerned, at least, you know, for some part of the cricketing world when we talk about women. And now with the women's IPL coming in, the messaging, the communication, how important is that in changing the narrative and making this a movement that is acceptable and accepted?
I think you know, we should not underestimate the significance of Women's Premier League getting launched. It's taken a decade and a half of Men's Premier League for Women's Premier League to start, but it's the first women's professional league at this scale, you know, for which, you know, the enterprise that I am involved with paid almost 1,000 crores, and the women are, you know, getting paid seriously.
That deserves a round of applause.
And it's an investment in faith. It's an investment in the belief that women will deliver much greater, I mean, as good cricket and as good entertainment for the fans and viewers of cricket as anybody else. And if you've seen the matches, the quality of the matches are exceptionally good. If you were to just see the match and not look at the faces, if the faces were blurred, there's just no way you'd be able to tell the difference between a men's team playing and a women's team playing. And this has broken the mindset, that because a lot of people said, would it really be as good? But if men are hitting sixes which are going beyond 65 meters, women are hitting sixes that are going beyond 65 meters and even up to 80 meters plus. So that is that's the difference. And you know, there is ultimately no better test than demonstrating it for everybody.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the big message that's coming out of it.
So what is the message, and I'm going to end with asking each one of you that, Uday, I'll start with you. What is the message that you want to send out to policymakers, to your peers in the corporate world, and to women and men who are watching?
So I think, you know, what the initiatives like putting women on the board and having one woman at least on every board and stuff like that, having CEOs, you know, women CEOs, these are all great. You know, these are all great brand communications for women, and these are enablers. People look at role models. But I think we have to start opening it up at all levels. If you're not creating an opportunity for women to play at club cricket and then women to play at state club cricket and women to, you know, go and do other things. Because not everybody can play Women's Premier League. Cricket is so big in this, men's cricket is so big in this country that it is being played in every gully, every lane. If you cannot ensure that everybody who's doing something, you know, corporate cricket, if there is no women's corporate cricket, then we are leaving an opportunity untapped.
Yeah. Okay. Well, here's to tapping more untapped opportunities, cricket and beyond. Naina Kidwai, the one thing that you would like to send out as a message to those watching?
Equal opportunity, to recognize that women can do as well as any. And if you give that equal opportunity and provide the environment which enables women to rise to their full potential, we would have a workforce that we would be proud of.
Subhrakant?
Equal opportunity, of course, but I think to raise the awareness levels of what women bring to the workforce, it is that well-rounded perspective, it is a different way of looking at things, and diversity in thought process, diversity in how you approach problems at work do give better solutions. So I think it is important for owners, for promoters, for CEOs to have that understanding and appreciation. Many do, many others need to get that appreciation that you're not doing women a favor by getting them to the table. They're actually adding value and adding more, punching above their weight.
Absolutely. Start to look at this as an investment and not as a benefit. And I think that is the mindset change, the mindset shift that we are hoping for. Uday, Shankar, Naina, Kidwai, Subhrakant Panda, many, many thanks for joining hands with us here to put forward the first CNBC-TV18 FICCI Gender Parity Survey. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause. There's plenty of fun coming up. It's not just going to be conversation. We've got music and we've got slam poetry and plenty of fun coming up. But thank you once again for joining us here this evening. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you, Shereen.